My dad forgot to hang up.
I overheard every word. She's a burden.
I stayed silent. Sold my $980,000 home.
Transferred everything.
Disappeared.
They came back from Europe, smiling, until the key didn't work. The house? Empty.
The note?
Surprise. A burden did this. The gut-wrenching feeling of hearing your own father call you a burden, plotting with your mother to manipulate you out of your home, a home your beloved grandmother specifically left to you? What would you do?
Because I did.
And when they finally returned from their lavish European vacation, a trip I paid for, keys in hand, smiling and oblivious, they walked into an empty house, a new lock, and a note that simply read, "Surprise. A burden did this.
My name is Emma Davis, and I'm 29 years old.
The $980,000 house my grandmother left me wasn't just a place to live. It was supposed to be my sanctuary. Instead, it became a stage for the most painful betrayal of my entire life.
Growing up, money was always tight in our house.
My parents, Robert and Diana, worked multiple jobs, always just scraping by. My dad, a factory worker, carried this huge chip on his shoulder, constantly grumbling about missed opportunities. My mom juggled part-time receptionist gigs. And through it all, they never let me forget that every single dollar spent on me was a dollar they couldn't spend on themselves. It felt like I was an expense, always. But my grandmother, Elizabeth?
She was different.
Where my parents saw limitations, Grandma Elizabeth saw potential, my potential. She was this incredible, savvy businesswoman who built her own real estate empire from scratch after my grandfather died young. Every weekend, I'd escape to her beautiful colonial home, filled with antiques and warmth. Her backyard garden, where we'd plant flowers together, became my real sanctuary. It was freedom, away from the constant tension at my parents' place. She'd look me right in the eye and say, "Emma, never let anyone tell you what you're worth. You decide that for yourself." Those words became my North Star. When I turned 18, Grandma helped me navigate college applications, scholarships, loans. My parents? They scoffed at higher education, calling it putting on airs, and refused to contribute a dime. College is for people who think they are better than everyone else, my father would sneer. I later realized he was just bitter because he'd never been accepted himself. So, I worked 3 jobs, clawed my way through, graduated with a business degree, and immediately landed a job at a real estate firm.
Grandma was beaming with pride at my graduation. My parents? They complained about the parking. Then came the day that changed everything. I was 25 when Grandma Elizabeth passed away suddenly from a heart attack. I was utterly devastated. She was my champion, my safe place. At the reading of her will, everyone was shocked. Well, everyone except maybe me, when her attorney announced she'd left her house to me. Not my parents.
The property at 1842 Magnolia Drive, valued at approximately $850,000. The lawyer read, "I leave to my granddaughter, Emma Davis, who has shown the determination and responsibility to appreciate its value." My parents' faces, they just darkened. The will was crystal clear. The house was mine, fully, with no conditions. They got a modest cash inheritance, which, predictably, they blew on a new car and electronics almost immediately. From the moment that deed transferred into my name, the house stopped being Emma's house and somehow became the family home. What started as casual suggestions about renovating the kitchen quickly snowballed into full-blown plans, drawn up without my input. All this while I paid every single bill, every tax payment, every repair cost. "We should really replace these countertops," my mother would say, running her hand across the granite I had just paid to install. "I don't like that paint color in the living room," my father would announce, completely ignoring that I had carefully chosen it. Even though I was a successful realtor, making a comfortable 6-figure income, they still treated me like a rebellious teenager playing house. When I tried to set boundaries, their response was always the same: "Family doesn't have boundaries." But somehow, those lack of boundaries only worked in one direction. After about 3 years of this bizarre arrangement, my parents announced they were planning a 3-month European vacation, their lifelong dream. What they didn't announce was how they intended to pay for it. "We can use the equity in the house," my father casually mentioned one Sunday dinner.
My blood ran cold.
"You mean my house?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The house that's only in my name." "Don't be selfish, Emma," my mother chimed in, with that familiar tone. "It's the family home. Your grandmother would have wanted us all to benefit from it."
I refused to take out a home equity loan for their lavish trip. But I made a huge mistake.
I offered to help them with some of the expenses, knowing they couldn't afford it otherwise. Before I knew it, I was funding nearly the entire trip, flights, accommodations, spending money, everything. And still, they complained that the hotels I booked weren't centrally located enough. The day before they left, I overheard my mother on the phone with her sister. Of course, Emma's paying. It's the least she can do, considering we let her keep the house.
Let me keep my own house? The house my grandmother specifically left to me?
I should have seen the massive red flag then. I was so desperate for their approval. If only I had known what was coming, I might have changed the locks before they ever left for Paris.
It was a Tuesday afternoon in June.
My parents had been in Europe for about 6 weeks, currently enjoying Paris according to their social media posts. I was home, after showing properties all morning, when I remembered the kitchen sink had been leaking. Since they were returning soon, I decided to get it fixed. I needed to ask my father where he'd put the warranty info for the faucet he'd installed. I dialed his international number.
Hello. His voice sounded distant. Hey, Dad. Quick question about the kitchen faucet warranty.
Do you remember where you put the paperwork?
It's starting to leak.
He sighed, a heavy, audible sound. It's in the filing cabinet in the den, second drawer under kitchen.
Why can't this wait until we get back?
Because water is currently damaging the cabinet beneath the sink, I explained, trying to keep the irritation from my voice. I just need to call the company.
Fine, he muttered.
Your mother and I are about to go to dinner, some nice place near the Eiffel Tower.
Sounds great.
How's Paris?
I asked, forcing politeness.
Expensive, he replied curtly.
Look, I've got to go. We'll talk later. Okay.
Thanks for the information. Enjoy your dinner. I heard some rustling, then what sounded like my father putting the phone in his pocket.
He hadn't hung up.
I was about to end the call from my end when I heard his voice again, muffled but still audible.
Who was that? My mother's voice.
Just Emma, complaining about something in the house again. His voice was clearer now, as if he'd taken the phone out of his pocket, still thinking the call was over. What now?
My mother sounded annoyed. Something about the kitchen sink.
I swear, all she does is find problems with that house.
I should have hung up. I knew I should have hung up.
But something kept my finger hovering over the end call button. I was frozen. I don't understand why your mother left her that house in the first place, my mother continued. We're her parents. It should have gone to us. Well, once we're back, we need to have a serious conversation about our retirement, my father said. Emma needs to understand that house is our security for the future.
My stomach dropped. They were planning something.
She's been a burden from the start, my father continued, his voice hard, clear, utterly contemptuous. All those years of expenses, college, everything. Now she has this valuable property just dropped in her lap. And what?
She thinks she deserves it?
What has she ever done?
A burden. The word echoed in my head like a gunshot.
She's always been selfish, my mother agreed.
But she's also easily manipulated.
Remember how quickly she agreed to pay for most of this trip? All I had to do was mention family obligation a few times.
They laughed together.
A synchronized sound I'd heard my whole life, but now it sounded absolutely sinister. We just need to keep working on her, my father went on. Eventually, she'll sign the house over to us, or at least add us to the deed. Her weakness is that she still wants our approval.
I couldn't breathe.
My hand was shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. I fumbled for my other cell phone and began recording.
What if she doesn't agree? My mother asked.
She will, my father said confidently. Emma's always been desperate for our approval.
We just need to make her feel guilty enough. Remind her of all we've sacrificed.
If that doesn't work, we start talking about nursing homes and medical expenses. Trust me, by this time next year, that house will be in our names. And if worst comes to worst, my mother added, we're living there anyway. Possession is 9/10 of the law. She'd never evict her own parents.
They both laughed again.
I felt physically ill. Speaking of which, my father continued, when we get back, I think we should take the master bedroom. It's ridiculous that she has the largest room when she's hardly ever there because of work.
Good idea, my mother replied.
We should also talk about that vacation property she's been looking at. Complete waste of money. If she has extra cash to spend, she should be helping us more.
Exactly. Why should we struggle while she's building some real estate empire?
She owes us. The conversation continued as they apparently walked to the restaurant, discussing various ways to manipulate me into giving them more money, more control, more of my life. I sat frozen in my chair, tears streaming down my face as every illusion I had about my family shattered around me. After about 15 minutes, the connection finally broke. I just sat there in complete silence, the phone still clutched in my hand. The house I had worked so hard to maintain. The house my grandmother had entrusted to me. The house I had opened to my parents out of love and obligation. They saw it as nothing more than their entitlement. And me? I was just a burden. A means to an end. Someone to be manipulated and used. In that moment, something broke inside me. But something else, something harder, colder, and infinitely more determined, took its place. I looked around the home, seeing for the first time all the ways they had gradually asserted ownership. My father's recliner in the prime spot. My mother's decorative plates replacing my artwork. My own belongings relegated to a tiny corner of what was supposedly my home. I wiped my tears, took a deep, shaky breath, and made a decision. If I was such a burden, perhaps it was time to lift that weight from their shoulders permanently. I called in sick to work for the next 3 days. I couldn't face anyone with the storm raging inside me. Every time I replayed that conversation, and believe me, I did obsessively, I swung wildly between crushing heartbreak and cold fury. How could the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally see me as nothing more than a resource to be drained? After the initial shock wore off, my reel-to-brain kicked in. I needed information, options, a solid plan. No emotional decisions. My grandmother hadn't built her success by acting rashly, and neither would I. My first call was to Patricia Winters, a sharp family law attorney I'd worked with. I laid out the situation, sticking to the facts. The house is completely in my name, I concluded. But they've been living there for almost 4 years. Do they have any legal claim to it? Patricia was blunt and efficient, exactly what I needed. Based on what you've described? Absolutely not. There's no common law ownership. You've maintained the property, paid all expenses, and most importantly, you have clear title. The fact that you allowed your parents to live there doesn't grant them any ownership rights. What about the fact that they are my parents? Does that matter legally? I asked, my voice still trembling a little. Not in terms of property rights, she assured me. You're an adult. You have no legal obligation to house your parents. The house is yours to sell, rent, or do whatever you please with. A huge weight lifted. At least legally, I was on solid ground. What about their belongings? That's a bit trickier, Patricia admitted. Legally, you should provide reasonable notice and opportunity for them to collect their personal items. I'd recommend documenting everything carefully and perhaps putting their belongings in storage where they can access them. I took detailed notes, my mind already racing to the next step. Next, I contacted Marcus Wilson, one of the top realtors in our firm, known for quick, discreet sales for divorcing couples and estate liquidations. I need to sell my house quickly, quietly, and for as close to market value as possible. I told him over coffee the next morning. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Running from the law, Emma? His weak joke fell flat against my serious expression. Family situation, I said simply. I need this handled with absolute discretion. No public listings if possible, no signs in the yard, no open houses. And I need it done within 6 weeks. Marcus whistled low. That's aggressive, even in this market. You're looking at taking a hit on the price for that kind of timeline. I understand, I said. What kind of hit are we talking about? We discussed numbers. Grandma's house had appreciated significantly. Market value was around $980,000, but for the expedited timeline and private sale, I might need to accept closer to $900,000. I can live with that, I said, calculating quickly. How soon can you start showing it? I have a few pre-qualified buyers looking for exactly this type of property, he said. I could have private showings set up by next week. Perfect. I'll need the house empty for showings. That afternoon, I created a detailed spreadsheet of every single item in the house. Items I had purchased. Items my grandmother had left me. Items my parents had brought. And then, the tricky part, items of questionable ownership. For that last category, I was ruthlessly honest. If I couldn't definitively prove something was mine, it went into my parents' column. No legal or ethical gray areas that could haunt me later. Next came the logistics. I needed a temporary place to live, movers for my belongings, storage for my parents' possessions, new bank accounts, a new phone number, a new email.
A plan for disappearing.
I found a furnished short-term rental about 2 hours away.
New bank, new phone, new email.
I meticulously gathered all my important documents: birth certificate, social security card, passport, the deed, grandma's will, and secured them in a safety deposit box at my new bank. As I worked through my checklist, I occasionally found myself hesitating.
Was I overreacting?
Then I'd replay the recorded conversation, hear my father's contemptuous "she's been a burden from the start," and my resolve would harden again. One afternoon, sorting through a box of grandma's papers, I found a letter she'd written to me but never sent.
It was dated just a month before she died. "My dearest Emma," it began.
"I want you to know why I've made the decisions I have about my estate.
Your parents have always expected things to be handed to them. I've watched them squander every opportunity. But you, my sweet girl, you've worked for everything you have. You understand the value of both money and hard work.
I'm leaving you my home because I know you'll honor it, care for it, and use it as a foundation to build your own success, not as a crutch to avoid responsibility.
Never doubt that you deserve every good thing that comes to you.
I'm so proud of the woman you've become." Tears streamed down my face. It was as if she had somehow foreseen exactly what would happen and was reaching across time to strengthen my resolve. The next day, I contacted a moving company. I arranged for a storage unit in my parents' names, paid 6 months in advance, and ensured the information would be mailed to them. Every night, I updated my planning document, crossing off completed tasks. During the day, I operated with cold efficiency. But at night, alone in what had once been my sanctuary, I often broke down. One evening, boxing up old family photos, I found one of me as a little girl, sitting on my father's shoulders at a fair. We were both laughing, my small hands gripping his forehead, his hands securely holding my legs. I remembered that day, the cotton candy, the stuffed animal he'd won.
For a moment, I almost called off the whole plan.
But then I remembered his voice. "She's been a burden from the start." The photo went into the box labeled Parents' Items. By the end of the 3rd week, Marcus had brought several potential buyers through. 2 made offers, both under asking, but within our discussed range. I accepted the higher one, $915,000, from a corporate executive who could close quickly.
The pieces were falling into place.
The sale would close in just over 2 weeks.
My parents would return from Europe 3 days after that. Perfect timing. The morning of the closing, I woke with a strange sense of calm. I'd cycled through grief, rage, doubt, and determination. Today, I just felt focused. I dressed carefully in a crisp blue suit, professional, confident, the armor I needed for what would be one of the most significant days of my life. The closing was scheduled for 10 a.m. I arrived at 9:45, a slim portfolio containing the few remaining documents in hand. Marcus was already there.
"Ready for this?"
he asked quietly. I nodded.
"More than ready." The buyers, Richard and Catherine Thompson, arrived precisely at 10.
They seemed pleasant, excited about the house.
Under different circumstances, I might have shared stories about the magnolia tree, the way the light hit the kitchen. Today, I just wanted to get through the paperwork.
The process was surprisingly anticlimactic. Sign here, initial there, sign again.
With each signature, I was simultaneously severing a tie and securing my freedom. When the title agent slid the check across the table, $915,000, minus the remaining mortgage and closing costs, I felt nothing
but relief.
"Congratulations," the agent said. "Best of luck to all of you."
Outside, Marcus caught up with me.
"You okay?" he asked, genuine concern in his eyes. "I will be," I said, managing a small smile.
"Thank you for everything, Marcus. I couldn't have done this without you." "Happy to help," he replied.
"Though I'm still curious about the story behind all this."
"Maybe someday I'll tell you," I said.
"But right now, I have movers to meet." The moving company arrived at noon. I had already packed most of my personal belongings, clearly labeled. I supervised as they loaded my furniture, boxes, and suitcases into their truck, bound for my new temporary apartment. My parents' belongings were handled with equal care, but different destination tags. Everything was photographed, inventoried, and loaded into a separate truck headed for the storage facility I'd rented in their names. I'd arranged for the access codes and payment info to be mailed to them at their European hotel. As the movers worked, I walked through each room,
checking closets and drawers. In my parents' room, I found a small box hidden in the back of their closet. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, from my grandmother to my parents over the years. I shouldn't have read them, but I couldn't help myself. They detailed years of financial requests, manipulative tactics, and Grandma's growing disillusionment with her son and daughter-in-law. Robert, one letter began. This is the last time I will provide financial assistance without a clear repayment plan. Your constant requests are straining our relationship, and I worry about the example you're setting for Emma. Another, dated just a year before her death. I'm deeply concerned about your expectation that my home will someday be yours. I've worked hard for everything I have, and I intend to leave my assets to those who will respect and preserve them. I suggest you begin making your own retirement plans that don't involve my property. I carefully replaced the letters and added the box to the items for storage. But I felt a renewed connection to my grandmother. She had seen through my parents long before I had. By late afternoon, both trucks were loaded and gone. I stood in the empty house, my footsteps echoing. Without furniture, without photos, without the accumulated evidence of lives lived within these walls, it was just a structure again. Beautiful, valuable, but no longer mine. I walked through each room one final time. In the kitchen, where I'd bake cookies with Grandma. In the living room, where we'd watched old movies. In the garden where she taught me the names of flowers. I hope you understand, I whispered, not sure if I was addressing her or the house itself. Finally, I placed the note I'd written on the granite countertop in the kitchen, where it would be impossible to miss. Surprise. A burden did this. I took one last look, then walked out the front door, locking it behind me. I dropped the keys through the mail slot, got into my car, and drove away without looking back. As I merged onto the highway, heading toward my new temporary home, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. For perhaps the first time in my life, I was making a decision completely for myself, unburdened by familial obligation or the desperate need for approval. The burden had been lifted. Not from my parents, but from me. My temporary apartment was nothing special. A furnished one-bedroom, but it was mine. No history, no expectations, and most importantly, no one telling me I didn't deserve to be there. The first few days were a blur of practical tasks. I unpacked essentials, set up my new laptop, and contacted my office to let them know I was taking a 2-week vacation, effective immediately. No details, just personal time. By the end of the first week, I had a routine. Morning coffee on the small balcony. Afternoons researching potential places to relocate permanently. Evenings with takeout food and mindless television to quiet my thoughts. I checked my old email and voicemail exactly once a day, never responding. Nothing from my parents yet. They were still enjoying the final days of their European adventure, completely unaware that their lives were about to change dramatically. My phone pinged with a text from an unknown number. My heart jumped before I realized it was just a delivery notification. Still, it made me aware of the constant tension I was living in, waiting for the inevitable explosion. To distract myself, I reached out to Megan Lancaster, a college friend I'd lost touch with, largely because my parents never approved of her wild lifestyle, which mostly involved dating occasionally and enjoying concerts. Emma Davis. "Is that really you?" she exclaimed when I called. "It's been what, 3 years?" "Something like that," I admitted. "I've been preoccupied." "Let me guess," she said, still trying to please the unpleasable parents. Her directness made me laugh for what felt like the first time in weeks. "Actually," I said, "I'm calling because I finally stopped trying." We met for dinner that night. Over pasta and wine, I told her everything. The inheritance, the overheard conversation, the house sale, my disappearing act. "Holy shit, Emma," she said when I finished. "That's simultaneously the most terrible and most badass thing I've ever heard." "I'm still not sure if I did the right thing," I admitted. "Are you kidding me?" she practically yelled. "They were planning to manipulate you out of your house. A house your grandmother specifically left to you. They called you a burden while living in your home rent-free and having you pay for their European vacation. If anything, you were too nice with the whole storage unit arrangement." Her validation loosened something tight in my chest. Maybe I wasn't overreacting. Maybe this was the appropriate response to years of manipulation. The next day, I scheduled an appointment with a therapist. Dr. Sarah Palmer specialized in family trauma. It was time to address not just the recent betrayal, but the lifetime of conditional love that had preceded it. "You mentioned something interesting last time,"
Dr. Palmer said during one session. You said you still sometimes feel guilty for overreacting to what your parents said. I'd like to explore that a bit more.
I shifted uncomfortably.
Sometimes I wonder if I should have confronted them first, given them a chance to explain before taking such drastic action. What do you think they would have said if you had?
I considered this.
They would have denied it, or said I misunderstood, or that they were just tired and stressed and didn't mean it. And would any of those explanations have changed the fundamental truth of what you heard?
No, I admitted.
It would have just given them the opportunity to manipulate me again.
Dr. Palmer nodded.
Emma, what you experienced with your parents is something we call financial abuse.
Using money and resources as tools of control and manipulation.
It's particularly insidious because it's often disguised as family helping family or parents looking out for their child. The term financial abuse hit me like a physical blow. I'd never considered applying that label to my situation, but as soon as she said it, I recognized its truth. The way they planned to pressure you into signing over your home, the way they manipulated you into paying for their vacation, even the way they made you feel guilty about your grandmother leaving you the house, these are all forms of financial abuse, she continued. And like any form of abuse, the appropriate response is to protect yourself, which is exactly what you did.
Something shifted inside me that day.
A final piece of lingering guilt dissolved, replaced by clarity. After that session, I began researching financial abuse in earnest. I was startled to discover how common it was, particularly within families, and how few resources existed to help people recognize and address it. An idea began to form, one that grew stronger with each article I read and each personal story I encountered online.
2 weeks later, I approached my boss with a proposal.
I want to create a workshop, I explained. Something for first-time home buyers, especially women, about recognizing and preventing financial manipulation in major purchases.
My boss, Vanessa Martinez, listened thoughtfully.
This isn't just about real estate transactions, I concluded. It's about empowering people to make financial decisions without manipulation or pressure, whether from family members, partners, or even unethical professionals.
I think it's brilliant, Vanessa said. And timely.
We've all seen clients pressured into decisions they later regret. If we can position ourselves as the agency that truly educates and advocates for clients' financial autonomy, that's a powerful market differentiation. With her blessing, I began developing materials for the workshop. What started as a simple presentation quickly evolved into a comprehensive program covering topics from recognizing subtle manipulation tactics to establishing healthy financial boundaries. I called it Building Foundations, Financial Autonomy in Major Life Decisions. We offer the first workshop on a Saturday morning, expecting perhaps a dozen attendees.
Over 30 people showed up. The response was overwhelming.
People shared stories of parents who had pressured them into inappropriate investments, partners who had undermined their financial confidence, friends who had manipulated them into inappropriate loans. Each story resonated with my own experience, reinforcing my conviction that this work was needed. After the third successful workshop, a local women's magazine asked to interview me. The article, titled Financial Freedom, Emma Davis's Mission to End Financial Manipulation, brought even more attention to the issue. It was through this growing network that I reconnected with my grandmother's sister, Aunt Judith, whom I hadn't seen since the funeral.
She reached out after reading the magazine article.
Emma, your grandmother would be so proud of what you're doing, she told me over lunch.
Elizabeth faced similar struggles with your father throughout his life.
He always expected things to be handed to him, just as his father had before him.
I had no idea, I admitted.
Grandma never really talked about that. She was private about family matters, Aunt Judith said. But she saw so much of herself in you, the independence, the work ethic.
It's why she left you the house instead of Robert.
She knew you'd use it as a foundation, not a crutch. Her words echoed the letter I'd found, confirming what I'd already begun to suspect. My grandmother had made her decision with clear eyes and full awareness of its implications. Have you had any contact with your parents recently?
Aunt Judith asked carefully. Not since our confrontation, I replied.
I've received a few emails, but nothing that suggests they've really reflected on their behavior or taken responsibility for it.
She nodded sadly.
Robert has always struggled with accountability, even as a child.
Nothing was ever his fault.
I'm sorry, Emma. You deserved better parents. I'm making peace with it, I said, surprised to find that it was true.
I can't change who they are or how they treated me.
But I can use that experience to help others and to build a better life for myself. On the 1-year anniversary of selling my grandmother's house, I took the day off work and drove to the cemetery where she was buried. I brought a bouquet of her favorite flowers, pink peonies, and sat beside her headstone. "I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me," I said softly. "About self-worth and standing on my own. About recognizing when love comes with too many conditions. I wish we'd had more time together, but I'm grateful for every lesson you shared." As I sat there, I reflected on how much had changed in a year. The initial pain and betrayal had gradually transformed into something else. Not forgiveness, exactly, but acceptance. My parents were who they were. Their behavior reflected their limitations, not my worth. The true burden I'd carried wasn't being their daughter. It was the exhausting effort of trying to earn love that should have been freely given. In setting those expectations aside, I'd found a freedom I never knew was possible. My phone buzzed with a text from Megan. "Still on for dinner tonight? The whole gang's excited to see you." I smiled as I replied in the affirmative. The gang was a group of friends I'd reconnected with or made new in the past year. People who accepted me as I was, who gave without keeping score, who supported without controlling. This was what real relationships felt like. This was what I deserved all along. As I drove home, I thought about the note I'd left in the empty house. Surprise. A burden did this. At the time, I'd meant it as a bitter reclamation of the word my father had used to wound me. Now, a year later, I saw it differently. Sometimes the heaviest burdens we carry are the expectations we place on ourselves to be perfect enough, accommodating enough, successful enough, to finally earn the love that should be our birthright. Laying down that burden was the most liberating act of my life. That evening, surrounded by friends who had become my chosen family, I raised a glass in a private toast to my grandmother, to my journey, and to the woman I was still becoming. Unburdened, uncompromised, and finally, truly free. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect yourself from people who were supposed to love you? Sometimes the hardest boundaries to set are with family. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to prioritize their own well-being. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, you deserve relationships that lift you up, not weigh you down.